joined here by the very own Brandon Thielk. He is a mental performance coach and he runs his own Instagram business and mental coaching business called Evolved Athlete. And yeah, so Brandon, just how did you get started in this field? What got you into it?
Yeah, so I started off as an athlete myself. I think that's how you originally get interested in it. So I was a baseball player, a pitcher, and I started off just kind of exploring, health and trying to perform better, just generally, like with nutrition and strength and conditioning and all those things. And I kept being pointed to this idea of like the mind. And so the mind's really fascinated me. And I think that's where all our limits are. And so I was just always trying to learn more about it. And it's this mental, emotional energy system that goes on in our body that I think has a huge impact on performance. And I think when an athlete's relaxed, calm, and at peace, like that's when they're going to perform their best. So every stone I've overturned has led to this idea that it's just finding peace in your mind. We all have regrets, we all have disappointments, letdowns, things like that, and if we carry that stuff with us, it really shuts us down and affects performance long term. So the more I dug into things, I just started to explore like, okay, like how does the nervous system work? Why does it, what impact does stress have on the body? Like, how does that affect performance? And so basically this connection between the mind and body is just huge. And it's so fascinating to me because there's so many dynamics to it, but it's really just finding ways to look at situations that bring you peace. That's what I've distilled it down to, is once our mind's at peace and our body relaxes, and then we're present and we're able to do what we want to do. So I guess that's it in a nutshell.
Now that's awesome. And I like what you said about really being at peace because I think that's important. It's important to be at peace when you're performing and while you're performing and even before performance. Because a lot of
Mhm.
times, a lot of athletes, they'll have all these anxieties, especially like grade school aged kids, they have
Yeah.
all the assignments they have due, might have issues at home. And it's just a lot of things going on. And that can often stifle their mental health at the moment and they're not at peace. And so then it's like, all right, I can't perform to the best of my ability because of X, Y, and Z. And so then my next question to follow up with that is, how can people, like, what are some things that you've seen that help people be at peace before they're performing?
I think it's just key to really face things head on. Because we all have these different aspects of life, and everybody likes to separate them, but in reality, they're all just our life, right? And so, if we have all this unresolved stuff, or we have extra things going on that we're carrying with us into the performance, that's going to impact us one way or another. And so, we want to be mindful of what's going on in our life. We want to address it head on. And that's our cue is always how we feel about something. So a lack of confidence is just like, I don't feel good about it. Right. And so it's, if I'm not feeling confident about something, or I have a stress in my life that's eating up mental energy, meaning it's pulling my focus off the task at hand, I just want to address that so I can get it off my plate, really. And so that's just like, how can I shift this, or is there an action I need to take to rectify the situation? Especially with young kids. I mean, there's so much of their life they're not really in control of, right? It's like, yeah, dealing with stuff at home and all the assignments at school, all those things. And so we just want to work through stress and build resilience. That's that idea of like, I'm more resistant to stress because I work through it on a regular basis. So I just like working out, like we can, increase our mental capacity by working through stress. Okay. We get better at it if we face it. But if we put it to the side and ignore it, then it just builds and gets bigger. Right. And then in that process, we kind of confuse ourselves too, because it's just like, oh, I stuffed this thing to the side and it's affecting me, but I'm pretending it's not, right? So then I start looking at other problems that aren't really the problem. And so we kind of get lost in that place. And then it's a little bit difficult to find your way back once you've kind of been chasing your tail for a while. So I think my number one thing is just like, hey, if it's bothering you, like, let's just look at it. Let's just like try and find a way to work through it, shift our mind about it, meaning, how can I see this situation in a way that makes me feel better about it? So, so much about being an athlete is being able to manage your mind and your focus. And so a lot of that is self-talk. It's how we talk to ourselves internally that is going to affect our results. So it's like, if I'm viewing things in a way where I'm hypercritical, or I'm beating up on myself, or I'm feeling ashamed, those are all negative emotions that are going to be hurting my performance. It's going to be causing tension and stress in my body. So I want to take a look at that and be like, how can I find peace with this? How can I forgive myself if I felt like I did something wrong? How can I what action can I take so this thing isn't pulling my attention and distracting me, right? So depending on the situation, it's going to have a different remedy, but the name of the game is paying attention to how you feel. And if you're in a negative state, we got to find ways to recenter and balance out.
For sure, for sure. And I agree with everything you said. And there was two things that really stood out to me as you were talking, when you talked about facing things head on and learning to properly address what it is that we're actually feeling. Because a lot
Mhm.
of times we often we'll try to get over something instead of going through something.
Right.
And the problem with that is that when you try to get over something, you're not really addressing the issue at hand, and it's not being dealt with. You're just, masking it or numbing it, and you're
Yeah.
not trying to dive deep. Whereas when you go through it, you allow yourself to fully immerse yourself in it, like feel it, get to the root of it, and then truly try to find out what is actually going on. And then
Mhm.
the other thing you were talking about was just, um, I don't know why it's escaping me right now, but really being able to like focus on the task at hand and
Mhm.
not be so, oh, now I remember, self-talk, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Self-talk is important because a lot of times we are so mean to ourselves a lot, and
Right.
things that we'll say to ourselves that we won't say to other people. And I think we say it to ourselves because we live with ourselves and like we're just always critical of ourselves. But in all actuality, and I say this all the time to people, like you have to learn how to be your biggest fan, right? The way we
Yeah.
fanboy and fangirl over our favorite celebrities or our favorite athletes on the internet is crazy. And I'm like, if
Right.
you take a fraction of that energy and fanboy over yourself, you'll be in a much better spot. Like there's been so many times where your favorite basketball player might have a bad game and you're still like, oh yeah, he's still the GOAT though.
Yeah.
Say the same thing about yourself. You might have had a bad
Yeah,
performance.
that
You're
people
still,
will like defend their favorite player and stuff, and I'm like, why
yeah,
aren't you defending yourself? Like, what?
yeah, exactly, exactly. Like people don't defend themselves with their favorite player. And so I
Yeah.
tell people all the time, like, yo, learn how to be a fanboy of yourself or fangirl. And it's not like saying that in an arrogant way of like, oh, I'm better than everybody. But no, like learn how to defend yourself and learn how to so encourage yourself because at the end of the day, you're the one who
Yeah.
lives with you 24/7. You're the one who's gonna hear everything that goes on between your ears and things of that nature. So I definitely
Yeah.
like those 2 points. The self-talk is extremely important. And how do we build upon our self-talk? How do you build positive self-talk?
Yeah, I mean, number one is relationship with yourself, right? It's like if you and that's it's helpful. A lot of these internal things are difficult because we're so externally focused, right? And
Mm,
so we can think about like, oh, how do I build a relationship with another person? Okay, so we can use that as a template, and we can be like, okay, well, like, how would I do that for myself then? Okay, what are the relationship qualities I'm looking for and all those things, and we start to become that, right? And so, yeah, how do I need to communicate with myself? Like, how do I hold myself accountable? Like all those things. It's like, um and it does, you do have to have a greater vision for yourself. Like that's the key to everything, is like you have to believe that you're bigger than your current situation. Okay, so that's what that purpose, that drive is, to be more. Okay, and that's what pushes you to work, right? And be like, okay, well, I want to improve this relationship because I want it to look like this, right? So I need to have some sort of vision I'm zoned into. And, if we don't have that, if we're just living day to day and we're just like, oh, today happened and, tomorrow I'll wake up and just go through the motions again. There's no improvement going on there. And from that place, you don't really feel like you have the power to change anything either. Okay. And so I think it is good to initially to look up to people, to be like, oh, like I like how this person does that, or they inspire me, because that gives us like some sort of template or model in our head, and be like, okay, well, that person built themselves into that, right? And so we all have that power, that ability to do that, and so initially we do externally focus and we're like, okay, well, what did they do to get to where they're at, right? And so that can give us a little bit of a roadmap, but it's always going to come back to yourself. Like, what are my weaknesses? What do I need to address to continually build and strengthen myself? And so that's the ability to receive feedback and constructive criticism from other people that are further along than you are, right? And a lot of times we get into this comparison game of like, I need to be this finished product today. And, if I'm not where I want to be, then I have to feel bad about myself. Right. And so I teach being process oriented. And that's just like, I understand that, hey, like, I'm not where I want to be, but I'll never be where I want to be. Right. Like the target's always going to be moving, because that's what evolution is. That's what's growing is, right? It's like every new experience I get expands my mind in a new way, and then I have new desires and new things I'm after, right? So it's continuously reassessing what you think, and it's being real with yourself. I'm a big fan of meditation, journaling, self-reflection, being able to look at yourself and be like, what am I not at peace with? What do I want to improve? And that's not, it's looking at it through the lens of like, I want to develop myself, not like, beating up on ourselves and I suck at this stuff and I'm not good enough. We usually start there. We usually feel not good enough. But step by step, like, you can build yourself into somebody that, feels really good about what you've got going on. Right. And I think for many people, their expectations are out of alignment. And this is probably because of social media. They want things to happen faster than they normally do. Right. And so that's why we shift to being process oriented and always feeling out where you're at on your journey, because if my expectations are blown out of proportion, I feel like I need things overnight, like I'm going to feel bad all the time, because I'm going to know that I'm not even close to where I want to be, right? And so that reality is going to keep hitting me in the face until I adjust my expectations to be like, okay, well, I need to take an honest assessment and look at, where I'm weak, and I want to work on that stuff. And that's the beauty of it, is you can literally improve anything you want. You just have to be real with yourself about it, right? And your bar might not be as high as some other people. There are different factors like genetics and upbringing and all that stuff, but there's a lot of stuff you can overcome. There's a lot of stuff you can grow beyond and really surprise yourself. But it starts with that vision for yourself. You really have to have a bigger picture that you're working towards. And then you just ask yourself on a daily basis, like, what step do I need to take that's in alignment with that vision, right? And I have to realize that vision might be like 10 years away, right? It might be a long process, depending on how big the vision is.
Whew, man, you just dropped some gems, man.
Yeah.
So, because I'm very process oriented too, and I really want to key in on that aspect of this conversation, is how to actually be process oriented and how the target is always constantly moving, right? And
Mhm.
it's funny because we set all these big goals, especially as athletes or just people in general. You set all these big lofty goals and you want to accomplish them one by one. And then when you accomplish a goal, you get that high for like 2 seconds, and then you're like, okay, now what? And I
Right.
tell people all the time, really focus in on the process, because you're gonna spend the most time there. And like you said, sometimes some processes take 10 years, and
Yeah.
you have to be willing to be okay with that and learn to trust that, like, all right, this is the journey I'm on. This is what I want for myself. This is a vision I have. And if it takes me 10 years, I'm gonna do that. But the problem is too, is we don't know how long it's actually gonna take. And I think
Yeah.
that's the part people tend to struggle with, is like, all right, I'm willing to do the work. I just wish I knew how long the work would take. But the problem with that is you have to actually do the work to find out how long it takes.
Yeah. I mean, you really have to enjoy the process.
Yeah.
And I think people's metrics are off a lot of times where they're looking at everything in relationship to this end goal, like rather than focus on where the progress is happening. And it's those are smaller details. Okay. And so I think that's what gets disheartening is people have this broad, like their outcome or goal oriented. And so they're focusing on a finish line rather than, what improvements do I see on a daily basis? Because, that's the thing is it's like fulfillment comes from seeing progress. Okay. So like I put work in and I can see myself getting better, and that's what makes me feel good. That's what makes me build confidence. Okay. Is like I know I'm heading in the right direction and the work is paying off. And so a lot of times we'll be putting work in and we won't feel like the work's paying off because we're not looking at the right things. Okay.
Mm,
So what keeps us process oriented is just focusing. Once I teach an internal focus, okay, we want to look at people that are close to our ability level. And that's what our competition is. Those are the people we're working against, but we don't want to like be focused on people that are way out in front of us or way further along in the process. Right. And so each day, like I'm continuously assessing the things I don't feel good about. That's our number one gauge is our how we feel about something, because if I don't feel good about it, that means I have negative beliefs attached to it. And that's never going to show. That's never going to show when I go to perform if I feel bad about something. Okay. So I just teach like being really in tune with what you feel and using that as your guide to work through things. Okay. So as I'm going about whatever skill I'm trying to develop, what areas of that do I not feel good about? Do I not feel confident in? Because mastery is just this idea of like, I don't even have to think about it. I just show up because I put all the work in, where it's just automatic. Okay. And so all we're trying to do is look at progress in any of those areas that don't feel good to us. And over time, we're going to be like, oh, like I got this now. I'm good. Like I don't have to worry about it. And so that's what fulfillment is like seeing progress in those little areas. And that's how we stay process oriented. That's how we can be like, it's a continuous evolution. And I don't care if this takes years, because every day I'm feeling stronger. Every day I'm feeling better. Right. And as long as I can detach from needing the outcome that I can show everybody else today, right? That's usually that's that external focus, that's needing validation from other people, which once again, we want to build the confidence within ourselves that, I'm doing this because I love it. I don't really care what anyone else thinks. We do want to get to that place where we care less and less about the external noise. Okay. And that's when we get really strong. And that's when you're going to be successful at no matter what you do. It doesn't even have to be sport. You can carry those principles, those ideas into other things, because you're just building yourself into a rock solid person that can handle just about anything. Okay. So that's why I love teaching process, is because there's always going to be something new, right? Like and I believe so. Evolving is just having new thought. It's like every experience is going to bring new ideas to me, and I want to follow that because that's what excites me. It's like, oh, this I find this interesting. I'm going to go explore that, right? And so that's what evolution is just following that path of what excites you the most. And so we can carry our development in sport into business to whatever we want to do, because it's the same principles no matter what you're doing. Okay, it's like how to be a successful person is just, yeah, it's blocking the noise out and just really focusing on yourself and building yourself. And as you feel better about things, a lot of the negative thinking and the negative self-talk goes away naturally, because you're starting to see how you carry yourself, and people are going to respond to you differently from that place, because you build this confidence and certainty about yourself that's like it's recognizable. Okay. And so that's one of my favorite things, is working on intangibles. And so it's like the character development aspects, because like I just want to develop my athletes to be outstanding people that excel, in their sport, but then they also carry that over into every other area of their life. Right. Like I don't focus simply on sport, because like I think that's very short-sighted. Like I said, life is a continuous thing. We're living all day, every day. And it is that relationship to self that we carry throughout our lives, right? So it's like you're the only person you're going to be with all the time, right? So we want to continuously build that, and you just want to be a person that's okay, like being by yourself. And that's what I generally like about athletes is the ones that are really driven, you do have to separate yourself. Like you have to isolate from everybody else because you have to do things that nobody else is doing to get really good, right? And so it's athletes find it easier to be alone because that's, going to the weight room every day and practice and all those things. Like it is that internal process. It is that finding ways to improve yourself. And that means you have to be doing things that are tailored to you, not the next person.
That's amazing. I like that response a lot. And you talked about detachment from the outcome, right? I remember when I first heard somebody say that, I was like, what are you talking about? What do you mean? Like, it's important to care about the outcome.
Yeah.
But then as she explained it more and more, I was like, okay, this kind of, I could see how this makes sense. And I know for me, it was like at the time when I heard it, I was injured. So I had no choice but to like detach
Yeah.
from the outcome and really focus on what was in front of me and focus on what I had to do to get back right in order to then be able to get to where I wanted to go. I think also a lot of people become attached to the outcome because they want to succeed, like they want to achieve their goals and things like that. And one thing I've noticed is that this is going to sound weird, but failure almost helps you detach from the outcome and it makes
Yeah.
you more fearless because
Yeah.
once you've already experienced failure, you're like, okay, I know what this feels like. Granted, it's not a good feeling, but you know what it feels like. And now I'm not as afraid to get back on the horse and try to chase this new goal again, even though I've failed at my first attempt. And so
Right.
I guess for athletes, right, what are some ways that we can actually practice detaching from the outcome?
Well, unfortunately, like you're saying, there's no real easy way to do that. You do just have to get your heart broken over and over again. Because, we build these expectations and like I said, a lot of times the results do become more about, trying to prove ourselves to other people. It's like I want to do this to show like a parent or a coach or somebody that didn't believe in me or prove them wrong and that kind of stuff. Like those are very common motivations early on. And when we focus on that stuff, it's coming from the place of not feeling good enough to begin with. It is a negative motivation, and that generally leads to burnout. And so when we have these negative motivations, we start projecting these expectations that are unrealistic. Okay, so we're just like, oh, like I want this so that I can show like how great I am, right? And it's a trap because it's not really based on reality. Like if I don't feel good enough, if I have low self-worth, I'm not going to be at the top of the mountain. Okay, it's the journey that so by the time you get to the top of the mountain, you're going to be feeling really good about yourself. Okay, so it's like each time you fail, it breaks your heart, but it's like it gets you more in touch with reality though. It's like, oh, this is what I actually need to work on to improve. Like you're shown every step of the way what the work is. It's just literally the willingness to face it and see it that way. Being like, okay, I asked for this, like this is what I want, but I'm not there yet. So I need the tools to get there. And so I build that through failure. Okay. So it's the willingness to be able to like to fail, to fall on your face, to make mistakes. And the more you do that, the easier it gets, right? Because you're just like, oh, I felt the worst of the worst. Like, my heart was broken. Like I built all these expectations and the rug got pulled out and now I feel lost. So that's like our starting point for building this idea of like, okay, I just need to face my weaknesses. I just need to work through them. And it gets easier and easier. It's that resilience that I've I've already gone through the worst. So like, and I didn't get defeated by that, right? I kept going. So if I can keep going through that process, then it's just like I build that confidence because it's like I know I can handle the worst of the worst, right?
Mhm.
And that's injuries are the biggest teachers, right? Like it's because it's like you're basically pulled out of performing and you're just like, okay, I feel alone. I'm by myself. Like I'm wounded. It is kind of a like rock bottom for a lot of people, right? So if we're able to work through that and get stronger on the other side, there's a lot of important lessons we can pull from that. And we start to have a more flexible mind being like, okay, well, like I know what I want, but I don't know when it's going to happen. Okay. And so that's that sweet spot of like, but I have enough faith to believe that I can get there if I keep working at it. And so I don't need to be at the finish line today. I know that, well, because like you said earlier, it's like once you reach the finish line, there's always something else anyway. So if we just understand that process of like, I'm always going to have new desires, I'm always going to have new things I'm going to work towards. This is just my target right now because this is what I find the most interesting, or this is what excites me the most. Okay. And and so if I just stick with it long enough, like it's going to show me what I need. It's like I'm going to be given things every step of the way. So it is a lot of trust. It's a lot of faith, and that's not an easy answer for a lot of people. But that is how you build something that doesn't exist yet, right? That's how you create. Is you have to have that vision and you have to believe that it's possible for you.
For sure, for sure. Like you said, it's definitely not an easy answer. And I think one thing that helps me personally is realizing that I can be like proud of the progress I've made so far and yet still um know that I want more to come.
Yeah.
I want more for myself and things of that nature. So I think just having that balance of the two and just knowing that, all right, yeah, I've put in all this work, I've been putting in training work, doing all these things. Am I a step closer to my goals? Yes. And at the same time, I'm proud of the progress I made, and I know how much further I have to go. Um, and there was one thing that you were saying earlier about, parents and coaches and things like that, and how a lot of times there's a lot of athletes out there who sometimes want to prove their parents and coaches wrong. And so, what role do you think parents and coaches can play to support younger athletes in building their mindset?
Um, I mean, I think it is just holding that space to help them work through and face challenges. I think that's a because a lot of times there would be like punishments or shame attached to somebody not being good at something or not knowing how to do something, right? And so there's like kind of an impatience that goes on. And so that doesn't help the development. Like it's just kind of like, the person already knows they're doing something wrong, and then they're being told that they're doing it wrong, and then they're not being given proper solution, right? And so I think the message is always just it's okay to struggle. Like, we don't learn to walk day one, right? Like we fall on our face over and over again, and then we learn to walk, and then you learn to run, right? So it's like that understanding the process of development and giving people space to learn and grow in their own way and helping them sort through it on their own, right? So it's like I can't just tell somebody to do something when they don't really know how to do it, right? A lot of times we learn by doing. So it's like showing them and then having them, you know, think of anytime you try something new, it feels awkward, it's not like in your brain yet. Like you got to try it out. And so it's like giving that space for people to explore that without it needing to be a certain way. So it's giving wiggle room to things. And you can hold somebody accountable without like beating up on them, right? And so I think a lot of kids beat up on themselves because like that's what the message from their parents or from coaches is, just like, oh, you're doing something wrong, and then they get frustrated with them, and then they're seeing that being like, and the kid wants to do it right, okay, but they don't have the skills yet. So it's just like I think that's where a lot of the negative self-talk starts, is from the outside influences. I think it's all learned, okay. And so once again, it's adjusting expectations. It's understanding that, hey, like if this is new to somebody, it's going to take some time, and we want to support their growth. We don't want to shame them for not doing it right, right? So it's we want to build people up. That doesn't mean you don't talk about working hard and holding people's feet to the fire and keeping them accountable to what they say they want. But it's like it's understanding that there are going to be mistakes made, and it's not going to go the way you want it to most of the time. So once again, it's detaching from outcome and focusing more on supporting the process.
For sure, for sure. And it's funny that you mentioned that part about, the self-talk comes from like the coaches sometimes. Because I remember when I was in high school, whenever our team would have a bad performance or a bad race, like I remember one time all of us had a bad race. And then we got back on the bus and we were just like talking and joking as if we didn't have a bad race. And I remember like when we got back to the school, our coach was like, "Oh, you guys didn't, nobody was upset, nobody was this, nobody was that." And so I internalize that as thinking, all right, I have to be super upset every time I have a bad performance, or else it shows that I don't care enough. And it kind of sent me down this like negative spiral because I will always be extremely mopey when I would have a bad performance.
Yeah.
And it was like you said, that external validation of, all right, if coach sees me upset after a bad race, he or she will know that I actually care about what it is that I'm
Yeah.
doing. And I've realized that's dangerous because at the end of the day, there's always going to be a new opportunity. And sometimes it's going to be another race that same day. So you have to have a short memory and just pick your head up and then keep it going. And I also liked how you talked about, holding athletes accountable without beating themselves down as well. And you mentioned that before, just holding ourselves accountable ourselves. And so, how do we hold ourselves accountable without beating ourselves up? Because I think a lot of times people think that accountability is, you know, just spewing out all these negative emotions and just beating yourself up constantly. So, how do we separate actual accountability versus beating ourselves up?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question because I think so many, just like you're talking about with your high school coach, like where, oh, like if I look upset, that means I care, right? And, you can care and not beat up on yourself. Like, it's like these things aren't like exclusive. It'll be like, you see it all the time. If somebody has a bad game, like, yeah, we want to look at that for what it is. Okay, be like, yeah, like I could have done better, or I just had an off day. Those do happen, and that's generally because other things going on in life are spilling over. Okay, but it's like negative emotion does nothing but hurt performance. Okay, so we want to have assessment. We want to be like, okay, yeah, I can do better, but we don't need to go to a negative place in order to learn from that, right? We can, and usually that sends us down that rabbit hole where I actually become a perfectionist and I'm always picking myself apart constantly, which, I have to help a lot of athletes come out of that because they basically tie themselves in knots mentally because nothing's ever good enough, right? And so when we separate this idea of like accountability and beating up on ourselves, it's I would say in order to hold somebody accountable, they have to have a purpose though, right? They have to be wanting to do what they're doing. They have to be wanting to get better. Okay. So in team sports, this can be a little bit conflicting because a lot of times you have kids that are doing a sport that don't even really want to do it. Okay. Like their parents just want them to. Okay. So it's hard to hold that person accountable because they don't really care. Okay. Uh, so it's the ones that care that are going to hold themselves accountable because they have that bigger vision and they want to do better. Okay. So there is no one size fits all approach to that. It's a recognition, I think, on the behalf of parents and coaches being like, I'm not going to force something that's not there. Right. If this kid doesn't really care, like I'm not going to make him care by yelling at him. Right. He's just going to feel bad and then he's going to resent me. Right. That's what's going to happen. Or a parent trying to force a kid to play a sport, maybe they didn't get where they wanted to in the sport, right? And so they want to live through their kid. There's so many aspects to all this stuff that it's no simple answer. But at the end of the day, it's like if somebody really loves to do something, like they're going to hold themselves accountable because they're going to want to work at it. And the only reason that's not happening is they probably don't have interest or there's other interest spilling into it. Like I said, parents or coaches projecting their stuff onto the kid, and that's going to make them shut down anyway. So yeah, these are all very complex situations, and it's dependent on context. So
For sure. No, thank you for answering that. I know it's a pretty tough question because that's something I actually really wanted to know, just in general. And so I know you mentioned how it's not a one size fits all. And so is that how you go about coaching your athletes as well? Like, what are some of the common themes that you've seen amongst some of the athletes that you coach personally?
yeah, I mean, I would say number one is perfectionism. That is being, very hard on yourself and like picking yourself apart. And with these types, generally practice is great, but then performances they dip, right? Because there's extra added pressure. And yeah, so what I do personally is it's simply just looking for where that person's hung up mentally. Okay. So through conversation, like I'll ask questions and people will tell me what they believe. Okay. And so my job is to shift their beliefs to be in alignment with the results they want. Okay. And so if they're telling me something that's in conflict, that's going to be indicated by a negative emotion. Okay. So they're going to be telling me something and they're going to have a mental hang up. And that's what's like blocking them from performing better. Okay. And so that is just a very individual process, like, because based on my upbringing and everything I've lived, I have certain beliefs just like you, right? We all have, our perception is an individual thing, so that's why there is no one size fits all approach. I can kind of have a system, a general system of like, hey, this is how we want to build a mindset, but based on somebody's experiences, they're going to have certain blocks to things, and so they need to communicate where their hangups are. And so we're always going to see that where there's a lack of confidence, they're going to be very conflicted. They're going to be telling you things that don't really make sense, like objectively. But they're really going to believe it because generally it's a safety belief, meaning they form that belief based on a disappointment or a trauma or some sort of pain in their life. Okay. So that belief protects them from that pain. And so that's where you encounter resistance where it's difficult for them to change.
Wow.
So that's a little bit deeper.
Yo, that's deep, but it's true though, because
Yeah.
oftentimes when you hear people talk, they almost tell on themselves a little bit.
Mhm.
And
It's like a subconscious, like,
yeah,
they want to resolve it, but they don't know how.
yeah, exactly. And so, with that, right? So you see the perfectionism and all those things. And so what role do you think that athletes can play, but also parents? I think a lot of times parents often cause their kids these anxieties, right? How you mentioned before, how some parents want to live vicariously through their children and they put so much pressure on them for sports. And there's been statistics and studies that have shown a lot of kids drop out of sport because of their parents. And so
Right.
how can parents play a role into like helping into dealing with like the perfectionism of their children and stuff?
Well, it's they have to provide the model. They have to address their own emotional issues, because the kid's learning that from the parent, right? So that's the best way to support them, is like provide the example, right? And show them like somebody that can work through stress, that doesn't freak out when something goes wrong, that doesn't like beat up on themselves when they make a mistake, right? So that's really what it is like the parents are just kind of teaching that to the kids, right? Kids aren't naturally that way. It's a learned response, and they pick it up from the models around them. Okay. So any parent can support their child, by working through issues and building that emotional balance and resilience that we're talking about, facing issues head on, working through them, rather than having emotional outbursts or going into these huge negative emotional dips, because that's what the kids are seeing. Okay. And so just like your coach is like saying like, hey, you guys should be upset, right? And you're like, well, we just want to move on to the next race, right? Why do we need to be upset about it? But you learn to be upset because your coach believes that's what should be happening, right?
Mm.
So he provided a poor model, for resilience, because what I want athletes to do is be very adaptable and flexible, meaning like we can acknowledge a mistake, or a weakness, and we don't have to feel bad about it, but we can also work through that, right? So because if I'm feeling bad about it, that's going to come at a cost, right? That's going to hurt my mindset, that's going to kill my confidence, all that stuff. So it's like I want to be able to look at things for what they are, being like, oh, this is where I'm at in the process and this is my next step of development. Okay. And so that's how parents can start to help too, is like be more process oriented, being like, I don't need you to perform I don't need this result, but I want to see you improving. And I'm going to give you the tools to help that improvement happen. Right. So rather that, it's like so much with, if a kid doesn't get the grade you want, then, it's like, oh, they get punished, or, you're upset with them. But it's like, well, they probably want to get the good grade. It's not clicking in their mind yet. Right. Whatever that subject is. Okay. So there's so many variables and so many nuance to these situations, that it's like, okay, if there's a problem here, I want to look at it and I want to identify the problem and I want to help build that into a strength, right? And so I'm going to give the tools to help support that growth rather than shame the negative aspect. Okay.
For sure. No, that's a great answer. And I think that's definitely something that I want to instill when I start to have like a family of my own and really, whether I'm involved in my kids' sport or not, like I definitely want to make sure that their mindset is top tier and make sure that that they are process oriented, like you said, because a lot of times kids do want to do well. The kids don't want to do something and not do well in it. And
Yeah,
so,
they don't want to disappoint the adults around them.
yeah,
And when they feel like they did, then they beat up on themselves.
yeah,
Okay. So that's the thing is, disappointments, you know, it's one of the killers of dreams, really. It's like people not being able to work through it and see it for what it is. It's simply a learning lesson. It's your next step in development. That's all it is. It's not like, oh, this is the end of the line and this is never going to happen. But if we hang on to disappointments and then they stack up, then it takes the fun out of what we're doing and then we don't want to do it anymore.
for sure, for sure. And so I know we're kind of out of time, but to kind of wrap up and conclude, right? What is one piece of advice you would give to anyone who might be listening to this, whether it be a parent, an athlete, a coach, or just some kid in general who might not be involved in the sport at all? What's one piece of advice that you would give to them?
I mean, I would say that everything has a big picture to it. I think we're very moment to moment, and that's to our detriment. Like you said, of a lot of our emotions we're not seeing the vision. We're not seeing a bigger picture in our lives. And that's how you make things happen is you have to have something to focus on and you have to work through the challenges are there to serve you. They're not bad. Okay. It's simply part of the process. So I think it's like that willingness to understand that when something doesn't go your way, that's actually serving you. Okay. So I think that's the most important lesson is like, these are all signs that are pointing to certain ideas. And it always comes back to you. You always want to work through things. You always want to get stronger. And we don't want to leave things in a place that make us feel bad because then we carry that forward and then it builds this idea that I can't make this happen and I don't have the power to change.
Wow, that was very good. And on that note, I just want to say thank you so much for taking time out of your day, like I said earlier, to really do this interview. I know a lot of people who might be able to watch this will be blessed by it and will get touched and hopefully even shift their mindset a little bit. And so I just want to say thank you again. And I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was great.